Hey everyone. If you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen that I recently had some very sharp comments regarding a libertarian candidate running for U.S. Senate out of Arizona, Mr. Marc Victor. Well, Thursday night, he was in a debate with Republican Blake Masters and Democrat challenger Mark Kelly. In the debate, the question asked if candidates believe President Biden was the duly elected president of the United States. So let's hear how libertarian candidate Marc Victor responded.
Mark?
Boy, for a guy who's never been elected before, he sure sounds like a politician to me. I'll answer the question. Joe Biden won the election. I wish they both could have lost. We could use somebody up there who could have done something different. But look, this is an easy one. All people of good faith want a free, fair, accurate, open election. And we all want only people who are authorized to vote to actually vote. I have no problems at all with reasonable requirements to vote. You should be able to get an ID. They're free. If you can't get an ID, maybe you shouldn't be voting. That's not a big deal. But I am against unduly burdensome requirements that are calculated to make it harder for people who should be allowed to vote to actually vote. But all of this is missing the big issue, Ted. This is not our problem. Our big problem with voting is that everything is up for a vote today. I don't want anybody telling me how I should use my body, my property, my money, and my time. None of that should be up for a vote. And I don't want to tell any of you how to use your body, property, money, or time. We are a constitutional republic, not an unrestricted democracy. Today, everything is up for a vote. Very little should be up for a vote. Like, for example, who should represent the good people of the state of Arizona. That should be up for a vote. What should the age of consent be? This is something that reasonable minds disagree on. That should be up for a vote. But everything else that we are voting on that has anything to do with your body, your property, your money, your time, that's what freedom is about, folks. None of that should be up for a vote.
All right. So even though his answer is played in full, it can be easily interpreted that Mark is suggesting that our age of consent should be lowered. My initial response was that he was well out of line and that he should step down as Senate candidate. Now, if you think that's harsh, you're right. It was, and I said it knowingly that it was harsh. In fact, I compared it to Republican Todd Aiken's 2012 comments when he suggested that during rape, a woman's body physically responds to prevent pregnancy. I had heard that there was a follow-up response from Marc Victor, but I was rather skeptical. A friend privately reached out, and he challenged me in a way that he had never done before. He simply said there was a follow-up response from Mr. Victor that I should watch it because I was wrong and he wasn't interested in discussing the matter. Wow. This particular friend has never come at me so terse, and we've had some fairly strong disagreements. Because of this, I was interested specifically in what Mr. Victor had to say that made my friend so sure that I was wrong that he didn't even want to discuss it. So I looked up the response on YouTube and I watched it. However, I was not very open when I started watching. I assumed he would be going on with some argument that's best left to the halls of philosophers. However, what he said surprised me. I'll link the episode in the comments and the original debate. His follow-up comments are about 8 minutes, but I'm only going to play 2 snippets here. So let's check out the first one, and then we will play this 38-second clip.
Hey everybody, Marc Victor here. And I wanted to cut a short video just to explain some comments that I made during the debate, if you can call this a debate. As you know, this was more like sound bites. And sometimes it can be very difficult to explain a more nuanced or complex position on an issue when you got 45 seconds, if you even get that, during a debate. So I wanted to take this opportunity to more fully explain what I said, what I meant, why it makes sense, and or not. If it doesn't make sense, let me know. I remain open-minded to whatever your take is as well.
First thing, I was especially taken back by his initial comment here where he expresses being open-minded and willing to hear out further criticism. You really don't hear that much these days. And let's be honest, the political landscape is rough. People cut your responses to make your words sound like they're saying one thing when a slightly fuller clip indicates something entirely different. And as Mr. Victor says, sometimes you get very limited amount of time to say something, and you may simply not have enough time to say something to correctly elaborate. So, right off the bat, Mr. Victor is coming across humble. I like that. Here's my explanation. And if you still disagree, then let me know. It's not the usual doubling down that we're accustomed to. So now I'm starting to become a little bit more open with what Mark might have to say. Now his 8-minute response discusses several things from his debate, abortion being another topic. You can check out the link in the show notes, but let's play the clip where he responds to the criticism specifically over the age of consent. And let's listen. This clip is about 3 minutes and 45 seconds long.
The reason I like the local small community decisions because this puts market forces on the question, right? If people are really upset with the position that I expect Mesa would take, they could refuse to do business there, not work there, not live there, move from there, whatever. They could boycott businesses in Mesa if they want, or Tempe if they don't like Tempe's rule. This gets market forces on the question. I don't think we're going to get 500 different rules here. What I think is we'll generally settle on the most reasonable selections. Also, the choices that should be up for a vote are only within a reasonable range of choices. And so I likened this question to many other questions. One of them is who should be representing the people of Arizona in the Senate? Okay, that's the kind of question that should be up for a vote. One of the other things that I didn't mention during the debate was the question of what exactly is a substantial risk. As you know, the live and let live position is that if somebody creates a substantial risk of harm to another person, then they violate the legal principle and that conduct should be prohibited. But what exactly is a substantial risk? Okay, reasonable minds disagree on this point. That's exactly the kind of a question that should be in the smallest jurisdiction possible. Well, I threw out in a second or two that I had to discuss it, the age of consent being one of those questions, right? Now, this is blown up on social media. Oh, Mark, doesn't think that we should have an age of consent or something like that. Who knows? That wasn't what I was suggesting at all. What I was suggesting is that reasonable minds disagree on what is the proper age of consent. Take alcohol, for example. The current law in Arizona is 21 years old to legally buy alcohol. Reasonable minds disagree. There's no right answer. Should it be 21? Should it be 22? Should it be 20, 19, 18, 17? I don't know, but there's a reasonable range there, right? Obviously, 10 years old isn't a reasonable choice. 25 years old isn't a reasonable choice. So we do need to figure out what is a reasonable range. That's step one. What are the reasonable range of available choices? And then once we got that figured out, step two, let's vote on that and let the people in the local community make that decision. Okay, so age of consent for purposes of buying alcohol is one question. Age of consent for entering into various legally enforceable contracts, that's another question. Right now it's 18. Should it be 19? Should it be 17? I don't know. That's the kind of thing that maybe people in the local community should decide on. Of course, having sex is also one of those questions. There's no objectively right answer as to what is the proper age that people should be allowed to legally have sex. But there's a reasonable range of choices there, right? 18 is the age right now. Could it be 19? Could it be 17? I don't take a position on that. There's definitely ages below 17 that are unreasonable. I am not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting is that we should first establish a reasonable range. I think 17, 18, 19, all that makes sense. There might be places that say, you know what, 20 makes sense. I don't know. Reasonable minds disagree on this question, and there's no objectively right answer. When we reach a question like that, we don't need a one-size-fits-all solution. Let the people in that local community, based on their customs and traditions and what's normal in their community, let's let them decide what makes sense.
Okay, so in that context, it sounds quite a bit different. In the moment, during the debate, his age of consent comment does come across as about sex. I think part of that is because when the phrase comes up and gets the most attention, it seems to be along that line. But as Mark points out, sex is just one aspect of life where age of consent is important. Another clarification that I think is unique, that is, we don't hear this in these sorts of conversations, but it is extremely valuable to the conversation, is that he's drawing boundaries for ideas. Mark states that there is a range of ideas where reasonable minds can disagree, but also ideas that are outside of that range are not reasonable. Thus, in the context of sexual activity, reasonable minds might disagree whether the age of consent should be 17, 18, or 19, but the age of 10 is not a reasonable age to even consider. While I have reversed my view on Mark's initial comment, I do not regret the harshness of my initial response. The Libertarian Party is the underdog in the political machine. How candidates express themselves to the public is absolutely critical. Gaffes, or even the appearance of gaffes, are not afforded to us like they are the Republicans or Democrats. However, if a candidate says something that appears inappropriate, and then they come back and follow up with a very strong explanation why we should absolutely, well, then we should be absolutely willing to jump back behind them. It is of no value to be tough on candidates if we're not also willing to firmly support them should they surprise us with a solid rebuttal to how their words were perceived. Those are the kind of candidates we need, the ones that we should want. They are the ones who are ready to respond to an unfair media who intentionally distorts their position or clear up a confusion when a platform that they're speaking on limits clarity. I also want to point out something else. His entire position is rooted in the idea of decentralizing power. Those who follow the liberty movement on social media, Twitter especially, at least where I am, know there has been a lot of conversation regarding decentralization. What is the purpose of all this talk about a national divorce if the first time a candidate communicates a strong message of decentralization and then is slammed because he chose a phrase that has charged connotation of sexual activity with minors? Now, you might say, but DL, the words we use matter. We cannot afford someone who chooses words unwisely that may be easily misinterpreted, even if what they're saying is correct. Well, here is where I may make some people angry, and you're going to have to deal with it. In 2017, president of the Mises Institute, Jeff Deist, ended an amazing speech saying this, quote, "Blood and soil and God and nation still matter to people. Libertarians ignore this at the risk of irrelevance," end quote. It was immediately pounced on by critics because the phrase blood and soil is an idea specifically pushed in Nazi Germany. And in 2022, critics still howl at that phrase. There was nothing wrong with the phrase because Mr. Deist was communicating a fact about people today. He was not promoting the idea as the Nazis understood and used it. That is a big difference. Similarly, Marc Victor used a phrase that comes with a negative connotation, but very much describes a libertarian position. One, our rights are not up for vote, whereas there may be certain limitations imposed by small communities based on age, and that there exists only a certain range where reasonable people may disagree. And his ideas are rooted firmly in the idea of decentralization, something that we have heavily supported over the last few months. Having heard Mr. Victor's defense and his initial humility, I reverse my opinion for whatever it matters here in Florida. I don't think he should resign from his campaign. His response is something that is easily discussed in a mere 5 minutes with friends and family, with a very strong likelihood that we will find common ground. How do I know? Today during lunch, I asked a friend of mine. I said, here's what he said. Here is what he said after the fact. Here is what he meant. My friend in 5 minutes understood it and said, oh, I totally get it. Now, he doesn't agree with the libertarian ideology or philosophy, if you will, but he understood it. And he didn't require any further clarification and didn't think that this particular candidate poorly represented us. He understands sometimes you just simply make a verbal mistake. Mark took ownership of his words. He offered further clarification, and he remained willing to hear critics out even after that. This is the kind of candidate that we need. I hope that others come to this conclusion. Thanks for watching.